Hi, I'm Pete Shau. You may know me from the RTO Show podcast, but today I'm doing something a little bit different. APRO and WOW Brands have launched a special project to bring the story of our industry to life like never before. They've asked me to sit down with some of the true legends of rent-to-own, capturing their stories, their impact, and their vision for the future. And now I get to share those conversations with you straight from the legends themselves. All of this leads to something groundbreaking, though. A new book, The Rent-to-Own Revolution, A Definitive History of Advocacy and Consumer Access, written by APRO CEO Charles Smitherman and WOW Brands CEO Brian Krast. The book explores the grassroots of RTO, the advocacy that has defined it, and the future that we're building together. Here's where you come in. We're giving away free copies once the book is released. Just head over to the RTORevolution.com and sign up for a chance to receive a copy in early 2026. Don't miss the chance to be among the first to hold this piece of RTO history. That's RTORevolution.com. Check it out and become a part of RTO history. Hello and welcome to the RTO Show. I'm your host, Pete Shau, and today we have another legend. Actually, you probably know this legend from the podcast before, not that he needs an introduction, but what used to be the legal counsel for APRO, now he's enjoying his retirement. I've got Ed Winn here, who's going to shed some light on some of the things that happened early on. I tell you, when we say legends, sometimes I don't know if we can say it enough. Ed, how are you doing today? How's everything going? How are you enjoying retirement?
I like it fine. My bones tell me that man is put on earth to work. That's why we're all here. And so suddenly not to have work is troublesome, quite frankly. Got to figure out something to do, but I'm not in a hurry to do that.
Well, at least you can do it on your time frame.
I have a year or two to figure that out.
There you go. There you go. For sure. So one of the reasons we wanted to do with this Legends podcast and interview a lot of the legends that we have, such as yourself, because there's so much history involved in what you guys have done and the things that you guys have had to get through in order to kind of be where you're at. And to make sure that we are getting there and we're doing the things that we need to do, we've got to actually talk about what happened in the beginning. I should say late 70s, early 80s. That's a big crunch time. And in that crunch time, we had a lot going on as far as we didn't have the legislation we have now. Actually, matter of fact, we didn't have a lot of the states on board like we did now. And, when you started, and you were there day one, I remember we talked about it before. You were there day one on the first meeting of APRO to get this done. And the first president was Bud Holliday back then, wasn't it?
Correct. Bud and Chuck Sims were really the organizers and inspiration for the creation of APRO.
Let me ask you a question, Ed. So as you're going into this is your first meeting, everything is starting to kick off. What was the idea or how to get all these independent dealers from all these states who have a lot of different ideas to come together under one banner like APRO to advocate for the business?
Well, I don't think that there was any grand scheme. They just thought some of those dealers at that very first meeting could have cared less about any laws. They were going to make a quick kill and get out of town, renting TVs to poor folks at high prices until they got caught. Others, Bud Holliday, Chuck Sims, and others recognized that they really had a potential gold mine if they could not be sued out of existence. And so they were very intent on making rent-to-own legal. At the time, there were no laws at all about rent-to-own, and so we organized, we came together, we organized. The thought was, we're going to run up to Congress and get a federal law passed. That was the goal. And we talked to Color Time, had a law firm that did their franchise work, Brownstein, Zeidman, and Schomer, who had some lobbyists. We talked to them. They said, we get this law passed, you only need to talk to about 6 guys. And we prevailed upon Senator Paula Hawkins in Florida to introduce a bill in the Senate. It got attached to some banking legislation. It passed the Senate 98 to nothing. and then that bill died in the House. We sped through the Texas legislature, and Ernestine Glossbrenner, a celebrated liberal from the south of Texas, a school teacher, came out hard against us, but we were able to turn her and get her to accept reasonable legislation in Texas in a month. Florida was not any harder. California took years because California is California, land of fruits and nuts.
Absolutely. So, talking about getting this done, was the approach of APRO when it was coming time to, we had to tackle what was going on, no laws, state level, was the idea to do a domino effect that APRO would approach it as, let me knock one state off of another until we had enough to make this worthwhile campaign for APRO and the rent-to-own industry? Or was it, I'm going to take, this state or with somebody's this state, you guys are going to take that state and try to tackle as many as you could at one time?
Well, as I say, early on, we weren't going to mess with the states. We were going to get a federal law passed. And we tried that for the first few years in the early 80s, 81, 82, 83, 84. Then there was a Michigan rental dealer who had friends in the Michigan legislature. So the very first law that got passed was at the behest of a rental dealer who had a dozen stores in Michigan and a friend in the legislature, and he was willing to spend whatever it took to make his transaction legal in Michigan. And so in the waning hours of 1983, the issue on the table was price controls, that somebody in the Michigan legislature said, we want to control your prices as a function of the early purchase option. The formula ended up being that we had to give, they wanted price controls. And we had to scramble literally on New Year's Eve to see whether the industry could live with that. And we decided that we could. It was an overall price cap of 2.2 times the cash price and no control on the cash price. And that law got passed. The very first one, in the closing moments of 1983, 1984, Alabama, Texas, South Carolina. How did we pick those states? By the dealers in the states wanted to get something done. And so Sam Choate went to South Carolina. I went to Alabama. I lived in Texas. And we knocked off those three states that year. And over time in the 80s, we began to realize that trying to get a federal law was going to be tough. It was going to cost a whole lot more money than we were willing to spend, and we seemed to be fairly successful at the state level. And so APRO formed a government relations committee that studied the states. I will say Rent-A-Center sort of drove that train, and Rent-A-Center said, hey, we got a lot of stores in this state, and we want to get a law passed there. And we'll spend the money to get it done. We'll hire the lobbyists. And so we watched and helped as best we were able, and began that process state by state of getting those laws.
Was there, each individual state has its own heartbeat. Were there a lot of differences? And when I say a lot, I mean, I know that there are some differences between state and state, some of them very little, some of them are quite a bit. Was it hard to navigate from one state to the next because of their differences, that it created a little bit of backlash, or was it just easy enough to kind of go through once they started getting knocked down?
Well, no, we had to fool with every state. Every state's very proud of its legislature and its laws and its people and its businesses. So they were all independently negotiated. Now, Rent-A-Center had a lobbyist sort of state nationwide. Her name was Connie Campanella, and she owned Stateside Associates that had lobbyists on the ground in every state capital. And she was on retainer with Rent-A-Center. She was able to get the Council on State Governments to come up with model rent-to-own legislation. It's in a book, 1987. And once we had that book, Council on State Governments is generally viewed as neutral. It's neither left nor right. They just try to fashion, and they do lots and lots of model legislation, lots of bills. They create dozens and dozens every year. So they came up with a rent to own bill, and we were able to take that bill with the imprimatur of the Council on State Governments around to the states, and we probably got, if I had to guess, a dozen states to adopt that model legislation almost verbatim.
Well, I mean, it's good to have that handbook to kind of go by. I got a question though. What were some of the states that were very difficult to get to come along as far as rent-to-own legislation within the state?
Well, let's see. Wisconsin has been impossible. We've never gotten a law there, and we've been trying since 1983. We've thrown bills in the Wisconsin legislature, and even with the assistance of the largest furniture manufacturer in America that's home based in Wisconsin and sells a lot of furniture to rental dealers, the name of which is lost in the mists.
Ashley Furniture.
Thank you, Ashley. Thank you. Minnesota was a nasty, nasty fight, and we passed a law, but we didn't get the language that we wanted in that law, and as a result, $35 million later in class action lawsuits, there is no rent-to-own in Minnesota because rent-to-own transactions are not only rent-to-own transactions regulated by the rent-to-own statute, but they are also credit sales under the Minnesota Consumer Sales Act with a finance charge cap of 8.5% a year. So you just can't do business at all in Minnesota, and we don't. And then New Jersey, we have no law in New Jersey. We got hammered with a big class action lawsuit, $110 million class action lawsuit, and the legislature said, we don't like you guys, and we don't want you in this state, and we ain't going to help you. So those were obviously the three toughest states. Other states that were difficult, New York we've had trouble in New York. The New York, we came out with a good bill early on. They wanted to amend that law in 2010, and we let them with increased price controls. And now they're at it again in New York. So New York is a troublesome state. Massachusetts, troublesome state. Connecticut, troublesome state. The Northeast states have paternalistic governments. They think their job is to help people manage their money. And so we have trouble in those kind of places. California, you mentioned, we worked on California for, I know, a decade before we finally got a law passed. And there's still opposition to that law in California from the AG's office today. I'm from North Carolina. And the caca hit the fan in 83, and they were not Joanne Faulkner. There was a legal aid lawyer there who had been working in Raleigh before we knew what was going on. They'd already passed a bill through the House. So we were on the defense. We hired a former governor to be our lobbyist and ended up coming up with a strange compromise at the very last minute that requires rental dealers to have a balloon purchase option on their rental agreements, which is against the law in most states. So North Carolina is truly unique and was a very difficult state for us. It's not now. And periodically, there have been efforts to bring the North Carolina law in line with the other states, get rid of the balloon and recognize RTO transactions as distinct from credit sales. But none of those efforts have been successful yet. Will they keep trying?
I know that we do have rental dealers in North Carolina, but that I actually didn't know about the balloon payment at the end. That seems actually counterproductive, but.
Well, let me tell you something. Dealers that don't know about that, it's cost them a lot of money. It cost one guy $3 million because he forgot to calculate his balloon. It's got to be more than 10% of the cash price. We've been doing business like that since 1983 in North Carolina. So it works. And there are dealers, because if you add the balloon, the transaction is otherwise unregulated in North Carolina. No caps on late fees, no caps on any other fees. dealers in North Carolina sort of like that. Some of them, others, especially the guys that multi-state dealers, North Carolina's a little bit out of step, and they would like to have more uniformity among those laws. I don't know where that lies today.
So when the beginning, when everything got together, you said that the idea was that we're going to get together, get a federal law passed, and it would help throughout the states. And that didn't happen. When did the strategy shift from this is not working on a federal level? It might be a better idea to tackle this head on in 50 different states.
Mid 80s.
Mid 80s.
We recognized, having gone to Washington for, I don't know, 3-4 years and getting absolutely no, other than almost lucking through with the very first try, we got hammered after that. And I told dealers, we're spending about $1 million a year in Washington. I'm not sure we couldn't get a law. I'm not sure we could get that our rent to own bill passed if we spent $10 million. And they kind of said, well, we ain't got $10 million, so forget it. And we sort of abandoned the federal effort. Mid 80s, we kept a presence up there. We hired Tip O'Neill's son, Kip, to be our lobbyist, just to kind of watch things. And the Legal Services Corporation threw bills in the hopper to turn rent-to-own into credit sales, but those bills didn't go anywhere. We threw bills in. We threw bills in every Congress up till, mid-90s. Every 2 years, we'd throw a rent-to-own bill in the hopper. No hearings, no nothing. Then there was a final push in the late 2001. We muscled a bill. The Republicans were in charge. We finally muscled a bill through the House with 6 votes. However the math is, 2014 to 206, something like that. We got a standalone rent-own bill passed through the House of Representatives in Washington, D.C. in 2001. It died in the Senate. We made another throw at it in 2005, but it was just going to cost way too much money. And plus, by then we already had 47 state laws, so we didn't really need a federal law anymore. I'm not sure that anybody, other than us keeping a presence there to make sure nothing bad happens, I'm not sure that there is a serious effort to try to get a federal law anymore.
No, as far as I know, it's not. And, when we talk about it, there's always so many different names that come up, and it always seems like a we effort. But in the beginning, and I think you even had mentioned it, there was a lot of different views on how rent to own should be done. Some regulated, some non-regulated. Some we had some bad actors and some good actors. How was it going through these laws and also trying to unify some of these dealers under the same banner to get some of these laws passed?
How did we do that? By the hardest? I don't.
After everybody, I would imagine that, as some people come in now, and it even happens to this day, you've got some people that are like, I don't know if I need APRO. I don't know if I need to be a part of this, association. I think that somebody else is going to do the work for me, right? If I pay my dues, it's great. But if somebody else pays their dues, you're going to do it either way. Back then, I think there might have been probably even more of a diverse group that kind of felt like I haven't done it. I'm kind of working my own. I'm kind of, this right now, for lack of a better term, is the Wild West. Why would I need to join? Was the advocacy group's ability to start knocking out some of these states and getting those laws passed, that help unify a lot of the different dealers and under the APRO banner?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we had board members who said, I don't want any public relations. I don't want to be in the newspaper. I got a sweet little business. I want to hide under a rock. I don't want anybody to know what I'm doing. And so, let's not do this. That voice existed. But once we started getting the laws passed and people started breathing easier in those states, saying, hey, I got a real business, there's a law that protects me, those voices got silenced. And they either changed their minds or they left the industry.
So with the people so you had a certain set of people that thought, this is not where we need to go. We could probably just keep it quiet. You had a certain set of people that said, by all means, we need to get this passed. Who are some of the people on the team of APRO to say we should probably push for this and get this done? Where were some of the
big guys?
The big
guys, Rent-A-Center, Remco, Color Time, they approved of our legislative efforts. They may have not approved of our instructional efforts, since they had their own ways of training their employees. But the big guys, there was then, to some extent, there is still a at least a debate.
Okay. Now let's go back to the late. We're going to say late 70s because I think APRO was born in 1980. Correct.
Correct.
So, what got everybody together to say, you know what, we're going to need an advocacy group. We're gonna have to create something, and get this together. What kind of led to that decision?
Well, once again, that was Bud Holliday and Chuck Sims. Chuck Sims was probably the largest. Color Time had more stores, franchise, but Chuck Sims had 50 Remco stores, and Bud Holliday had 15 ABC stores, and they were, they were enlightened. They had vision about the prospects of the making rent-to-own a real industry, because until then it wasn't. And so I'm not aware that the reason for the first meeting was to come up with some sort of advocacy philosophy. They just were going to meet. They had never met before. They were just stray rent-to-own stores around the country. And Bud Holliday wrote a letter to all the ones he could find, going through the Yellow Pages, saying, hey, we're going to have a meeting of rental dealers. You're invited. It's free. And so people came just to chew the fat. They talked about accounting issues. They talked about finance issues. They didn't really talk about rent. They didn't talk about legal issues at that very first meeting. I was the only lawyer there, and I'd never heard of rent-to-own. I didn't talk about rent-to-own legal issues or any. I talked about the Federal Trade Commission and the overreach of government regulation very generally. So that was really not, to my mind at least, the purpose of that organizational meeting. That came very quickly later. Once they decided, yes, let's have a club. If we're going to have a club, what are we going to do with it? Well, let's go get some laws passed. I mean, that's to my mind, that's the order of things. That's how it came about.
Do you remember at the time how they devised how people would be a member and the membership dues and how that would come along?
Oh, you bet. I was at all those meetings, and it was very important. The original board of directors, there was a substantial percentage of that membership of the board of directors said, we don't want to help, we want to help make rent-to-own legal. Maybe we do not want to help people get in the rent-to-own business, and we're not going to let people who just want to rent TVs be members. So the very first version of the bylaws was that you had to have standalone location and 150 BOR before you could be a member. You had to already be in the rental business before you could join APRO. That was a huge issue.
I actually have never even come close to knowing that. I'm very glad that you mentioned that. Talking about the bylaws and some of the things that were created, there was some framework that, I believe I see it in every APRO magazine. It's somewhere in there. It has like these, and I believe it's different, areas of what it is that, APRO, basically the do's and don'ts of that. And, back then there was so many different views on rent to own. We had a PR problem. I think somebody else put it very, very, elegantly. We had a PR problem in the rent to own industry. And when did the FTC kind of really start looking at RTO as an issue and then become a kind of a thorn in the side of the rental dealers?
Well, we got a very favorable. The FTC wasn't very. The FTC's been around, was around before APRO was around, but they left us alone.
So the FTC was never really a big problem, not as much as the CFPB was.
No. Answer no.
Okay.
And the Federal Trade Commission in '98, I think, studied the rent-to-own industry. We helped them. We gave them some statistics and let them look around our stores. And they published a report on the rent-to-own industry, and we liked the report. The only thing that we didn't like was their analysis of the keep rate. They said it was 2/3, and we just knew that was incorrect. That that 2/3 of the people were not renting long enough to own. That our percentage was under 30%.
It was kind of the opposite way.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
but otherwise, it was a fairly good report, and we used it politically as needs required. And my recollection was that came in '98. And the CFPB, we were able to work the Dodd-Frank Act. We had some very good friends in Washington by then because we've been going up there for 25 years. And so we were able to be kept out of the Dodd-Frank Act. That made the Dodd-Frank people very unhappy because the law is pretty clear that if you have an initial term of your rental transaction of less than 90 days, the CFPB has no jurisdiction over you. And so they've whined and moaned about that since 2010 when the law was passed, but we've been largely successful. They've taken a few shots at the big guys, but they haven't hurt anybody. They've sort of been gutted here lately.
Well, they have been, and I agree with you that I'm not actually too bothered. It doesn't keep me awake at night, but I can tell you what, I'm curious though. Henry B. Gonzalez comes up a lot. What do you remember what exactly it was that sparked his initial disdain for rent to own and his drive to get rent to own kind of shut down?
We'll never know that. I mean, I asked his office and they were not forthcoming. That was in '93, '94 when he had public hearings. And we don't know the genesis of his interest in rent to own, but it was a scary moment because he was a powerful figure. He was head of his committee. The Democrats were in control of the House, but we were successful in keeping his. And he threw a bit. He had a 4-hour hearing. We had 15 minutes. We had 3 hours and 45 minutes of rent to own bashing, and then we got to talk for 15 minutes. And he said, "Thank you very much." He threw a bill in the hopper, but he was unable to get his bill out of his own committee. So we were fairly well organized by the mid '90s and sort of knew how to fight politically. So we got a lot of bad publicity. Wall Street Journal came out with couch payments and assorted other ugly things on the very front page of the Wall Street Journal.
Oh wow!
Shortly after the Gonzalez hearings, we know how to take a punch.
I think that's one thing I can definitely say.
We've taken a few, and we whipped him. We whipped him. He couldn't get his own bill out of his own committee, and that's weak politics. That's what that is.
Right. Absolutely. So, in the beginning, there's a lot of different viewpoints on how rent to own works, how rent to own gets done. Do we want to approach the laws? Do we not approach the laws? Do we form a committee? Do we not form a committee? We get it all. It starts going through. That's exactly the way it started out. We start getting together. These letters are sent out. People start showing up. At what point in time did APRO start taking, a reasonable idea that through APRO, these rent to own practices and tactics should be on a level playing field universally as much as possible throughout rent to own?
Well, I think a lot of us always felt that way. We would love to have had a federal bill. We couldn't get one. And to the extent possible, the state laws are reasonably uniform. I mean, some guys have $5 late charge, some guys have 10, some guys have no processing fees, some guys have a $10 processing fee, but they all recognize the RTO transaction as separate and distinct from a credit sale, and then they go about different kinds of disclosures that they want. And we can live with those. And over the years, what it has meant is multi-state dealers have to have a different agreement for, if not every state, for most states. Occasionally you can combine rental agreements.
So back in the beginning, there were certain dealers that did certain things that kind of looked that left a black eye in the industry as far as their collection practices or their sales practices. And we've mostly come all the way through that. But what was what was it that APRO was able to do to kind of change the viewpoint of our industry, at least from APRO's point of view?
Well, I mean, we always thought at APRO we were going to put the industry's best foot forward. We were going to make the industry look good, and if you didn't subscribe to that philosophy, you didn't want to be a member. I mean, we had huge fights early on about whether you could disclose the total cost or not. Some guy said, "Oh hell, if I put the total cost of those TVs in my rental agreement, nobody will ever rent one." And we say, "Well, yeah, they will. We don't care. Some guy's been doing it all along." And so they came back and said, "Well, if I have to put that number in there, I'm going to bury it in the fine print. I'm not, I don't want people to see it." So they just lost. Those guys lost, and the better angels prevailed, and have ever since. And so they ain't many bad guys left.
So if you were to put a time frame on when it tipped for, we're going to do this the right way, we're going to put our numbers out there all the way, we're not going to kind of shy away from that, what time frame would you say? Was that early on in APRO's induction, or did that happen mid 80s, late 80s?
From the very first time I ever met rental dealers, I said, "Fellas," because I wasn't a rental dealer, and I just was making an observation as a lawyer and a college professor. I said, "Fellas, if you got something to hide, you ain't going to make it." And so get over it. Get over it. You tell them any damn thing you want to. You're not a credit sale under truth in lending and under the state laws, so you're safe there. But you got to tell the truth about this transaction. And if you're not willing to do that, your days are numbered. That was my message.
Yes.
From the get go. It's still my message, and that message won the day. The industry's not hiding anything.
Well, no, if you've ever gone through a rental agreement nowadays, I couldn't imagine anything that's not in it. Now, I've always been out of the state of Florida, so I only know the state of Florida's rental agreement front and back, and I could probably read it to you and kind of quote every corner of it. But I couldn't imagine anything in there that's not being said. Everything from how much the weekly, monthly, and semi-monthly rate is, what what your fees are, what your total cost is, what you can and can't do, the ability to return, service, loaners, contacting you. I think everything in there is pretty simple, easy, and set forward. Who actually? And I never really asked this question, but was APRO a part of devising the rental agreements per state?
No, we didn't want that liability in case we did it wrong. So I've written a lot of rental as a lawyer. I have malpractice insurance, and I've written a lot of agreements for rental dealers because I got malpractice in case I screw it up. But APRO was never in the business of providing. Believe me, members said, guys would say, "Yeah, I want to join APRO. Give me a rental agreement," and we said, "No, we don't do that." And they sort of groused about it and said, "Geez, that's awfully cheap of you." And I'd have to explain it's a liability issue. That if your rental agreement gets screwed up, we don't want APRO being sued.
Well, I mean, it makes perfect sense.
Sue your lawyer if you want to, but don't sue APRO. And so APRO's never done that.
So I do have a question. This is a personal question. It's somewhat of a personal question, but this is definitely an Ed Winn question. I heard that at some point, Elizabeth Warren was actually your neighbor.
She was. She was my next door neighbor. We had dinner.
Was that in Texas?
Yeah, it was in Austin. She was teaching bankrupt. She was a bankruptcy professor in the law school, and I was a B law professor in the business school. And I was single and rode a Harley. And she was married and had 2 kids. Her husband had to commute to St. Louis. He was a college professor, a law professor, teaching legal history at the, I want to say, University of Washington in St. Louis, maybe. And so he had to fly up there. And she was very well known, bankruptcy lawyer, professor. So we had lunch once, and she could tell and I could tell that we were coming from different viewpoints.
Different sides.
Let's just be polite. So we didn't have dinner beyond that one time.
She did. Well, I do know that she was born in Oklahoma, born and raised. She ended up going down to Texas to teach in several different places, and then eventually ended up in Massachusetts. And when I heard that, I was like, it's a small world, no matter how you look at it. Talking about
Indeed.
people in the government, were there anybody in the government that stood out to you as advocates for what we did? So we can always say Henry B. Gonzalez was somebody who did not like the rental transaction and did everything he could to kind of go against us. Was there somebody else on the other side of the fence that was on the side of APRO and rent to own in the industry and said, you know what,
We
I
had
think this
we
is a great
had
idea?
we had numerous friends in the legislature. Uh, Lacey Clay was a representative from Missouri, a black guy, one of our real champions, and helped us stay out of Dodd-Frank. Barney Frank was a good friend of ours, and there'd be a long. I'd have to. I don't do name. My brain won't do names very well. We had a lot of very good friends in the legislature, people that we supported and met with and knew very well. People who visited our stores, understood the transaction. There's another black rep, trying to remember where he was from, who had rented his dorm, his bed, and his TV when he was in college, so he understood rent to own and was one of our champions. Name is gone. I'm lucky to remember Lacey Clay. Yeah, we had good friends. We had good friends, and probably this day and time we got more good friends than we have enemies, quite frankly.
Well, it's comforting to hear because a lot of what happened in the late 70s or early 80s, and a lot of people, what they're telling me, that there was this fog, this cloud of, we don't really know what's going on. We don't see a lot of others, and it's not as connected. The world isn't as connected back then as it is today. I mean, when you say, that Bud Holiday was sending out letters from the Yellow Pages, which is something that I remember. A lot of people now can, literally go on Google and type in, rental
Sure.
dealers in this state, or how many within 5 miles, and you have an answer within seconds, and you can send them an email, probably get that all done in 10 minutes, where back then you literally had to look it up, write it down, send out a letter, and then hopefully get a response. So it's, there was this veil of almost like the fog of war. It was, you don't know what's going on, you don't know how it is. And then as the association got together and started creating what they started doing, with you and others, Bud Holiday and Chuck Sims were able to kind of start molding together. I think that kind of cleared away the fog and kind of made a clear path. As you're doing this, I do have a question, or two questions. Where did the name APRO come from? Who created that?
Chuck Sims had a advertising agency, and he went to them and he said, "We're coming up. We're going to create a trade association. Come up with some names." So they gave us 4 or 5 pages of words matched together. It started out as the Association of Professional Rental something. It wasn't organizations, agents, companies, and that morphed into. To this day, I don't remember how it moved from professional to progressive, but it did. So, historical accident is the best I can offer.
And that wasn't an Ed Winn thing. You didn't come up with that name, Ed.
I did not. I did not. I came up with a lot of crap, but not that. Not the name.
And so, as we create APRO, we get the name. We're starting to go forward. Do you believe, in your mind, in your opinion, that the creation of APRO and having some of these legendary names that helped create it with you kind of started allowing more people to come into the business than probably would
Absolutely.
have if you didn't create it?
Absolutely. Yes. Yes. It first of all, people became aware of rent to own. Because rent to own was really just in a crack. I mean, if you advertising was minimal, you might have had an ad in the Yellow Pages, but you weren't on TV. There was nobody advertising rent to own on TV back in those days. And remember, when we first started, all we rented was TVs, 19-inch color portables, and then when they came, big 25-inch color consoles. That was our product mix. Two, we had two. Uh, so we we just evolved from there. But yes, I think APRO's existence and we fought back. I used to keep these notebooks of negative press and positive press about the rent-own industry. Negative press was that big. Positive press was that big. I mean, people weren't saying very many nice things about rent-own, but the fact that that we existed, that we were out there, we had a trade association, we had conventions, people could see, hey, this is a real business, count me in. I don't think it would have grown like it did without APRO.
As it grew back then, like you said, there wasn't a lot. It became a lot more known as it formed. Was there any associations that actually challenged APRO and said, this could be better? And in turn, APRO was able to say, you know what, this could be better, and kind of went along with it.
We certainly had battles with the, at the time, furniture rental industry, Grandtree, Court, and Aaron's. Aaron's was not in rent-own until the late 80s. So early on in the early 80s, I mean, Aaron's was there, and it was a big company, and I think it was publicly traded, but it was a rental company. They rented apartments full of furniture to visiting executives, 6-month deals. So they were under the Federal Consumer Leasing Act. They weren't doing rent-own, and they barged into our board. Charlie Loudermilk and some of his colleagues from Court and Grandtree barged into one of our board meetings and said, "You rent-to-own scallywags," being polite, "are ruining the good name of rental. We want you to change your name. Quit calling yourselves rent-to-own. Quit calling yourselves rental. Be something else. We're the rental industry, and your collection practices and your pricing and all the bad things that you're doing are hurting our image."
I can only imagine how that conversation went.
Our guys jumped up, fists clenched. Said, "Jump on in here, fellas. You want some of this?"
I can only imagine how that conversation. I would have loved to be a fly on that wall.
It was testy.
There were other agencies around. There's always agents, the FTC, the CFPB. Was there any agencies that kind of worked with APRO in order to help advocate for the rental industry, or to help correct it and guide it, give it a Northern Star?
No.
Or was it just APRO?
Just APRO. There were no government agencies interested in assisting the rent-own industry in that day or in this day, in my mind. So no.
Ever?
No, never.
Wow. Was there any consumer groups that wanted to help out?
No. Consumer groups, by definition, want to help consumers. They don't want to help businesses. And so
that is true.
They were always on the other side.
Now,
by default, they were on the other side.
I hear.
Now, I suppose we may have prevailed upon some local chambers of commerce. We made friends with the Better Business Bureau here and there. Nebraska Better Business Bureau. Lynn Leach is tight with the Better Business Bureau in his state, so they were never antagonistic. Were they helpful? No, I'm not so sure. Chambers of commerce, we're businesses, so they might have thrown us a fig leaf. I don't know. I certainly don't remember any champions of rent-to-own other than APRO.
Now, were there any agencies, or I should say any organizations that were formed throughout the years that didn't last like APRO did? Was APRO a one-time wonder, a lightning in a bottle, where it was started in the 1980s and despite trials and tribulations has made it all the way through? Or were there other agencies that started, whether it be the early 80s or any time, that were either somewhat around the area of what APRO did, or their own advocacy group as far as rent-to-own is concerned, and just didn't make it?
Well, you had state groups. So when the Texas bill, Ernestine Glossbrenner's bill, was being debated in the early 90s, there was another group besides APRO that they were in the small loan business but had a few TVs out on rent, and they wanted a voice as to how this bill was going to look. And so they created the Texas Association, TARA, the Texas Association of Rental Agents, and they had a voice. And so any number of states, once we went into a state, they would form a state group, the Alabama rental dealers, the Pennsylvania rental dealers, New York rental dealers. And the problem with those states, two problems. One, APRO's never really been able to figure out how to mesh state associations and APRO. It's always been awkward. Number two, once the law got passed, state associations said they kind of went the way of all flesh because they lost. Now, Florida is a notable exception. Y'all have a very viable and lively state association. You go to the legislature every year, and it's alive and well. That is not the case with many states. Once the law gets passed, dealers say, we don't need a state association anymore, or I quit, I'm not paying dues anymore, leave me alone. So, but we did have state associations that they had their own kinds of connections in the state houses that we didn't have, APRO necessarily. So you had those groups. Almost every state where there was a law being worked on had a state association at one time or another.
When it comes to you being legal counsel at APRO, how involved were you in helping forming those state associations?
Oh, we went around and helped them. We had the state Tiger John Cleek out of Missouri took that. He strapped that on. We created the State Association Coordinating Committee, SACC maybe, and flew to Oregon. He and I went around various places. We had model bylaws for state associations, and we'd give seminars about here's what you need to do to organize your state. You need I can remember sitting in Tennessee trying to organize a Tennessee rental dealers. Nobody wanted to be the president, and I said, "Listen, folks, it's 3:00 this afternoon. We're not leaving until somebody stands up and says, okay, I'll be the president." And shortly thereafter, somebody stood up. I don't remember who, Lowry Schrader, somebody. Shannon Struck, somebody. Shannon was there, I remember. So we had state associations had growing pains, and a few, California had a good association, but as soon as the law got passed, disappeared. Terra used to have $100,000 in the bank in dues. The Texas Association of Rental Agents, separate and apart from APRO, used to have big conventions. I gave a seminar at a Terra meeting where there were 200 people there. Terra's disappeared off the face of the earth. It's just gone because rent-to-own is not a legal issue anymore in Texas. It hadn't been for a long, long time, other than the theft of rental property issue, it's really not an issue now. You can't do it. You can't throw people in jail for stealing TVs in Texas. Well,
so going into the close, I got to know, you were there since the induction of the very first meeting and made it all the way through. Ed Winn's name's all over the halls of rent-to-own. If you had to say something, and now that you're retired, you kind of get to sit back and look at everything maybe from a different point of view. Is there something that APRO isn't doing now that probably you think that they should do or get into or possibly look into in the future?
Let me tell you, us finding, and I can't claim responsibility, although I was on the committee, I suppose, the search committee, finding Charles Smithgall it's like going to Arkansas and finding a diamond there. You can sift for diamonds in Arkansas, I think. Smithgall has great vision, and he's working on this artificial intelligence project of his. Charles, thank you. Apologize. He has great vision. He is moving APRO forward in ways that I never even contemplated. So high energy and great insights. So I predict great things for the association. As long as the legal issue confronted APRO, trade associations do well when they've got a big specter that they've got to defend against. We lost that. APRO hasn't been threatened with legal extinction in 30 years. So what do you do if you're a trade association and you don't have a common enemy anymore? Charles has figured that out, and how to keep people interested in a cohesive group of competitors. So I tip my hat to him whenever I see him and say he's doing a great job, and he is.
I'm gonna agree with you 100% on there. I believe that he is. I love the direction that's going on. As a matter of fact, you know that this is also part of what the research project that he's doing, and to put us and APRO up front and personal with the new way of things, the AI, the chat bots, and everything in between. I think he's doing an amazing job as well. So I will make sure I pass that along. But you guys, I appreciate you sitting here with our conversation with Mr. Ed Winn, who is now retired, the ex-legal counsel for APRO for over 40 plus years. If you have any questions for Ed or me at the podcast, please hit me up at pete@thertoshowpodcast.com, or you can go on the website at www.thertoshowpodcast.com, see what's going on there, check us out. Don't forget that LegCon happens every single year. I'm discussing a lot of legal issues with the legal counsel, Mr. Ed Winn, but the reason I'm doing that is because he has all that experience. And you know what? It's great to have advocates like Mr. Ed Winn, who's done it for many years, Charles Smitherman, and a whole bunch of names that we can mention. We'd love to see you on Capitol Hill and LegCon in April coming in 2026. So if you can do that, make sure that you listen to the show to be aware to find out how to do that. And you can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and YouTube, where you're going to find us. Make sure you subscribe, and make sure you go to the website and buy some swag. Ed, I appreciate you taking out your time today. I know that we had a little bit of a change this morning, where you had to kind of go into the office, which I know is probably not what you're used to anymore, but I'm so glad that you were able to do it and make some time for us. And I will tell you guys, as always, get your collections low to get your sales high. Have a great one. Hey everyone, it's Pete Shau here from the RTO Show podcast, and I want to tell you about a company that's making a real difference in the rent-to-own space, Wow Brands. I've seen firsthand how they approach marketing. And let me tell you, it's not just about ads. Wow Brands builds complete digital ecosystems designed specifically for the rent-to-own industry. Their e-commerce and lead generation strategies are built to bring in qualified leads. And did I mention that they are actively working with the rent-to-own industry while also being members of APRO and TRIB? Listen, these folks are passionate problem solvers. They don't just slap something together. They design, build, and scale the kind of digital retail tools your business needs and your customers actually want. So if you're serious about growing, reach out to Wow Brands at wowbrands.com. I trust them, and I think you will too.